Imagine waking up one morning to the sound of cracking wood so loud it feels like the sky itself is breaking apart. You rush to the window, only to see your neighbor's giant oak tree tilting dangerously toward your house. Within seconds, the unimaginable happens. The tree crashes down, destroying not only your roof, but also changing your life forever. This is not just a story about a fallen tree. It's a story about insurance law and how one unexpected event turned into a payout worth millions. But here's the hook. What if I told you that sometimes what looks like a disaster can actually save you financially? This story will show you how one man's tragedy became a turning point, and how understanding your home insurance could mean the difference between losing everything and walking away with more than you ever imagined. Stay with me, because by the end, you'll see why insurance is not just a boring policy. It's a lifeline. The story begins in a quiet suburban neighborhood in the United States. The streets are lined with tall trees, some older than the houses themselves. Our main character, James, lived in a 2-story brick house he had bought 15 years earlier. He worked hard, paid his bills on time, and like many homeowners, he had insurance. But like most people, he never really read the details of his policy. To him, insurance was just another monthly expense. Nothing more. Next door lived Mr. Peterson, an elderly man whose yard was dominated by a massive oak tree. That tree had been standing for more than 70 years. It was beautiful, but it was also dangerous. Its branches stretched far over James's property, and during every storm, James worried. He even mentioned it casually to Peterson a few times, but the old man always brushed it off, saying, "It stood this long. It will stand longer." But in 2025, storms have become more unpredictable. Data from both the US and the UK showed that severe weather events were increasing every year. Stronger winds, heavier rainfall, and sudden storms were damaging thousands of homes annually. Insurance companies were paying billions in claims, and disputes over property damage had become common. On one stormy night, James's fear finally came true. The storm was fierce, and at around 3 a.m., the old oak tree split at the trunk. With a deafening crash, it fell across James's house. The roof caved in, the upstairs bedrooms were destroyed, and parts of the living room were buried under wood and debris. James and his family escaped unharmed, but the house was almost unrecognizable. Now, here's where things get interesting. Normally, if your neighbor's tree falls on your house, you might assume they are responsible. But in most insurance policies across the US and UK, that's not always the case. Unless you can prove negligence, like if the tree was obviously rotting and your neighbor ignored it, your own insurance usually pays. James was devastated. He thought he would be stuck fighting Peterson in court for years. But when he called his insurance company, he discovered something shocking. His policy not only covered the damage, but also included something called extended replacement cost coverage. This meant the insurer had to pay for his house to be rebuilt, not just at its current value, but at today's construction prices, which had skyrocketed in 2025 due to inflation and supply shortages. At first, James didn't believe it. But as the claim process unfolded, he realized the payout would be far higher than he ever imagined. The insurance company had to consider everything: the cost of demolition, rebuilding the house from scratch, repairing landscaping, even temporary housing for James's family while construction was underway. The numbers kept climbing. What started as a disaster was turning into a financial lifeline. But let's pause for a second. Here's another hook. Do you know what's hidden in your own policy? Most homeowners never check the fine print. And yet, within those boring pages could be a clause that saves your life in a crisis. James had no idea he was sitting on a policy that would eventually pay him millions. Meanwhile, neighbors watched in shock. Some whispered that James was lucky, others called it unfair. Peterson felt guilty, but legally, he wasn't held responsible. The insurance company shouldered the entire cost. Weeks turned into months. As adjusters, engineers, and contractors assessed the damage, the scope of the claim grew. The oak tree had not only destroyed the house, but also damaged underground utilities, fences, and even parts of the driveway. Everything had to be replaced. James's lawyer advised him to make sure every single loss was documented. And here's where education comes in. In both the USA and the UK, homeowners often underestimate their claims. They forget about small details: damaged wiring, furniture, electronics, or even the cost of debris removal. But James was meticulous. He kept records, receipts, and photographs of everything. When the final settlement was calculated, James was stunned. His home insurance payout was not just enough to rebuild his house. It was worth millions, far more than the house's original market value. The tree that once terrified him had unexpectedly given him financial security. Yet, the emotional toll was real. His family had to live in temporary housing for over a year. His children missed their bedrooms. His wife cried over the memories lost in the rubble. Insurance money could rebuild walls, but it couldn't replace the feeling of home. That's something no amount of money could buy. Still, there was a powerful lesson here. Insurance isn't just about protecting bricks and wood, it's about protecting your future. In 2025, when disasters are more common than ever, having the right coverage can be the difference between despair and survival. And that's just the beginning of James's story. Because what happened next turned neighbors into enemies, lawyers into heroes, and raised a question we all need to ask ourselves. Are we truly prepared for when disaster strikes? The weeks after the tree fell were full of tension. At first, James thought it was over-insurance would handle everything. But soon, he realized that disasters don't just end with money. They create questions, conflicts, and emotions that can tear even the strongest families and communities apart. One evening, James returned from a meeting with his insurance adjuster to find Peterson, his elderly neighbor, waiting on his porch. The man's face was pale, his eyes red. "James," he whispered, "I feel like I ruined your life. Here's the hook. What would you do if your neighbor's guilt became heavier than the damage itself?" James paused. Part of him wanted to blame Peterson. After all, the oak tree had been a problem for years. But deep down, James knew the law. In most cases, unless a tree is visibly dying or your neighbor ignored warnings from authorities, the homeowner isn't liable. Peterson wasn't negligent. He was just unlucky. Still, guilt spread through the neighborhood. Some neighbors whispered that James had hit the jackpot, getting millions while Peterson got away free. Others defended James, saying no one chooses where a storm will strike. The community that once shared barbecues and birthdays now found itself divided. Meanwhile, the insurance process grew more complicated. The company sent in multiple adjusters to verify the claim. They looked at every crack, every broken pipe, every damaged piece of furniture. And here's an educational point: insurance companies don't just hand over money. They investigate. They question. They delay. At one point, the insurer argued that some of the damage was pre-existing. James felt his stomach drop. What if they refused to pay? He feared he might lose everything. But James didn't give up. He hired a public adjuster, someone whose job is to fight for homeowners. With professional help, James pushed back. And slowly, piece by piece, the insurance company approved the full claim. Here's another hook. Did you know that in both the USA and the UK, hiring a public adjuster or legal advisor can increase your payout by 30 to 40%? Most people never consider it, but James's decision turned out to be life-changing. Months passed. Construction crews tore down the remains of the old house. New foundations were poured. Walls rose again. But James's family still lived in temporary apartments, missing the smell of their kitchen, the comfort of their garden, the warmth of their own beds. One night, his daughter asked, "Dad, when will our home come back?" James swallowed hard. The truth was, painful money was plenty, but home wasn't just a building. It was love, memories, and security. That night, James realized something powerful. Insurance can rebuild walls, but only family rebuilds a home. By the time the new house was completed, it was bigger, stronger, and more modern than before. Solar panels lined the roof. Reinforced walls promised safety from storms. Every detail screamed resilience. The final cost? Millions, all covered by insurance. But the story didn't end there. A legal twist was waiting. A few months later, another storm hit the neighborhood. This time, more trees fell, damaging several houses. Suddenly, other neighbors started asking questions. Why didn't Peterson cut down his tree earlier? Could he have prevented the first disaster? Wasn't he responsible after all? Rumors spread. Some neighbors threatened lawsuits. Peterson, once respected, felt isolated. His health declined under the stress. James visited him one afternoon, only to find him sitting quietly in his living room, staring at old photographs. "James," he said softly, "I don't sleep anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I hear that tree falling again. Here's the emotional hook sometimes. The heaviest damage isn't physical. It's the weight of guilt and fear." James, with empathy, reassured him. "It wasn't your fault. If anything, it taught us all to be prepared. My insurance saved me, and maybe this will push others to check their policies too." That's the hidden message in this story. Preparation isn't optional anymore. In 2025, both the USA and UK face stronger storms, rising insurance claims, and more legal battles over property damage. If you don't know what's in your policy, you could lose everything. But if you prepare, you might not just survive, you might come out stronger. Finally, after almost 2 years of struggle, James's family moved back into their rebuilt home. The first night inside, he sat on the porch, staring at the space where the oak tree once stood. He felt a mix of sadness and relief. That tree had destroyed his house, but it had also given him the means to rebuild his life. Here's the last hook. What if disaster isn't the end? What if it's the beginning of something better? James learned that home insurance isn't just paperwork. It's protection. It's power. And sometimes, it's the only thing standing between despair and hope. So here's the lesson for you. Whether you live in the USA, the UK, or anywhere else, don't wait for a storm to teach you the value of insurance. Read your policy. Understand your coverage. Ask questions. Because when disaster strikes, you need to know that your safety net is strong enough to catch you. And as for James, he still looks at that empty spot where the oak tree once stood. But now, instead of fear, he feels gratitude. Because one fallen tree taught him the greatest lesson of all. Sometimes, destruction clears the way for rebirth. If you found James's story eye-opening, take a moment today to check your own insurance policy. Share this video with a friend, because you never know whose life might be saved by this knowledge. And remember, home isn't just walls and windows. Home is security, love, and the wisdom to prepare for the storms of tomorrow.